Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the December 19th meeting of the Militarized Equipment Ad Hoc. Today, I was hoping to take up a few things. First, I wanted to thank Commissioner Jackson Castade for keeping things afloat and sort of handling things while I have been out. Thank you very much. The second is that I want to talk a little bit about scheduling. And then the third, we have a few other things before we get into the policy that we have that we were thinking about talking about today, which is explosive breaching. I will have the policy up on the screen for us to sort of go through and comment on, and Lieutenant Febble and Sergeant Cardona, who are our subject matter expert and leads on this, hopefully will take some notes and then work on some of the edits and suggestions that they may hear from today's meetings for our next one. The first thing I want to talk about is scheduling. If we stay on the track that we are going right now, our next meeting would be scheduled for January 2nd, which I believe is a state and federal holiday. If we do not have that date, then our next date would be January 16th. Anyone have a burning desire to, I don't mean it that way. What are people's thoughts about meeting on January 2nd?
I think it's really up to Febble and Cardona. So if they can do it, then I know the department's all game.
I'm available, sir.
And I'm available too.
I'm also available.
I'm also available. Is the 16th a holiday?
That is a good question.
Yes, I believe it is.
Yeah, January, it's Martin Luther King Day.
There's also the 9th is a possibility, right?
The 9th, Commissioner Jordan and I have another ad hoc scheduled. Okay, then.
We also have the Wednesdays if we want to go back to Wednesdays.
Right. Commissioner Jackson Castade, do you have a opinion?
Yeah, I think Jennifer brought up a good point. If we could shift maybe just for those weeks to Wednesday, that would be ideal so that we can all observe the holidays accordingly. Yeah. If folks are still available on Wednesday, that is.
If Wednesday to be considered, I would only be available Wednesday the 18th and the 25th due to prior obligations.
I think then, since Lieutenant Febble is lead, I think we're going to go with January 2nd in the interest of keeping momentum going, and then perhaps think about January 18th if schedule permits. Okay, just make a quick note about that.
Okay. 6 p.m. on those dates, correct?
Correct. 6 to 8. 6 to 8. Thank you. Let's see. This is more for notification and for the for Commissioner Jackson Castade. I know that the City Council has been considering the other militarized equipment policies that were previously recommended by the Police Commission. It was originally bumped to tomorrow, but I think it was rescheduled again to January 17th. Can someone from the department confirm for me?
Yeah, I talked to our person who's a liaison with City Council, and I believe the 9 were put off until January. I think tomorrow is going to be command posts and LRAD are still going on.
I took a look at the notes for that, and for some reason it has a note about also getting moved to January 17th.
I mean, that's a possibility, but We haven't been notified yet.
Okay. I think Commissioner Jackson Castaigne, Commissioner Jordan, and I agreed to be available to comment on those at the time. Do you, Lieutenant Thomason, think you can arrange for someone to let us know when the item comes up or give us a best guess? And we'll arrange coverage.
It will be me. I'll do it. I'll do the notification and I'll put us all on an email group.
That would be great. Much appreciated.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. The next thing I wanted to mention was that something to think about. I can't remember if it's the local ordinance or it is the state ordinance, but annual report deadlines are coming up. I believe that they are due March of each year past the initial year. And I think, just as a thought, either the department should consider whether it's going to be ready or I'd be asking the commission to have it on some other date this year, considering kind of where the policies are and when we got started on this. That's just something to think about. We're not making any decisions tonight about it, but I'm trying to look forward a little bit so that we can get some thoughts on when we on the annual report timing for these policies or these impact reports. Thank you. Mr. Lindsay Paul on the March deadlines in the local ordinance. The local ordinance also mentions that the police commission can choose a different date. So I'm just putting that on the department's radar. Maybe we'll come back and talk about it on the 2nd. All right. Before we get into explosive breaching, there was one more thing I wanted to mention, which was we did have some emails back and forth about something Mr. Lindsay Poland, I think, picked up on, which was breaching shotguns, which were listed in the department's initial inventory, but we have not had a discussion about any policy or any any discussion about the department planning on using it or what it intends to do. We did have some emails going back and forth, and Lieutenant Turner told us through email, I think it was last week, that although the department does have some of those shotguns and shells, which appear to be specifically for breaching, the department does not intend to use them at the moment. Someone confirm for us, please.
Yes, that is correct. So we will not be using them since we will not have a policy governing them.
And just so I'm clear and we're clear, are the shotguns that are, is it just the shotgun breaching rounds or are there specific shotguns too?
From the email I was reading with Joe Turner, I believe it's both.
It's both. Okay. And those I think those were listed in the department's initial inventory, so we know what they are, and we'll have a sense of, or we will know if they end up getting used in some annual report or subsequent notifications. Okay. That's all of the sort of, I won't call them minor, but smaller things to come up. Anybody have anything, Mr. Lindsay Poland?
Yeah, just on the on the shotguns, if the department doesn't intend to use them, that in effect constitutes a policy. Because what at least the state law and I think the local ordinance asks for is things that are in the possession of the agency, and then what the policy is for those things. So if the policy is we're not going to use it, then that's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. But I think because it is in the possession of the agency, unless the agency is about to dispose of it, it would make sense to have some kind of statement on the record that that is the policy regarding the use of that equipment.
Okay, let me look at the state policy again, just to make sure. And if we do have to come up with something, I know it's easy to come up with a one-page policy saying we're not going to use them. Or maybe let me talk to the chiefs and see if we do plan on get rid of them. But I appreciate the notification.
Also, just a reminder, these are public recorded meetings that do very much have a record. I know they're a little bit harder to find, but that is why we're asking these questions here. Okay, thank you for that. Anything else on any of the things that I've mentioned, or anything else besides explosive breaching? All right. I think that means I am up to put this up on the screen. So bear with me for 1 second. Changes. Okay, Lieutenant Febel, do you mind pulling up the policy? I need to quit this application before it works.
Yeah, let me see what I
Otherwise,
can do,
think
sir.
much appreciated. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I'm on a different computer than I'm usually on.
Everybody see
Excellent.
it? Or are you looking at my email?
No, that's the policy.
All right.
I think we're looking at the one that I had put some pretty serious editing into.
Yes.
Okay.
It
And
has,
I-
yeah, and it has the track changes for everybody's suggestions for review.
Okay. I want to start off by saying that I do not have these up because I think that that is what should happen. Obviously, any and every person can disagree with me or support whatever it is that they feel is the right thing to do. This was just my attempt to put some of the things I was thinking on paper. I think perhaps the first thing is, I don't know. Why don't we take this in sections, huh? Why don't we, I think it's easiest to maybe begin talking about seeing if anyone has any questions specifically about the explosive breaching unit programs or its usage. And then going a little bit into authorized and prohibited use. And then sort of after that, because those are the bigger sections, then going into sort of nitty gritty about policy. How does that sound?
Sounds good, sir. Did you want me to keep the track changes on? Or do you want me to remove them?
I think it's
Let's keep them
helpful to
on.
see him. Yeah, I think it's helpful to see him. Because that also includes the comments, which I think are helpful for context.
Yep. Okay. Let's start off with questions about the explosive breaching program, or breaching unit, or explosive breaching unit, or the tactical team. Does anybody have any questions, clarifying questions that they might have about the?
I was curious about the question that you posed of whether the department wants to use explosive breaching for rescue operations.
Sergeant Cardona, Lieutenant Febel. I believe that's the third paragraph that we have in the overview section.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, what kind of rescue operations are we talking about? Sorry, I'm trying to pull up, expand, it's very small on my end.
No worries, I can read it to you. The section says, in the event of disasters, explosive breaching may be employed to rescue victims entrapped in buildings or other structures where conventional access is restricted or unavailable.
And what was the specific question? It was something from last meeting that came up that I don't recall the exact question.
Miss 2 asked if the department anticipates using explosive breaching for operations like what I just read.
Okay, I understand. I think having the ability to do so is important. Obviously, it's a case by case basis, but the ability to be able to breach a certain area that is non-conventional means can do so, I think is extremely important. I think the ability to do it is important as well. Like having the ability and policy to be able to do it. Each obviously circumstances are going to be different and wide range, and whether it be a natural disaster or some other type of disaster, I think it's important that it's not a tactical operation itself.
Is rescue explosive breaching something that the department or the breachers train on?
It's just for the group while Chris is standing by. So for those who haven't, go ahead, Chris, are you there?
Yeah, I got kicked off the meeting and it just booted me back in. I can't see anything anymore now.
So the question is with regard to rescue operations, does your team or team of breachers, do we train on events where they become rescue operations and a deployment of breaching apparatuses?
Sorry, can you hear me now, LT?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So just do we train to use?
Okay. Sorry.
Situations?
Yeah, so it would be the same format. So large garage doors and those are the main ones, not the main ones, but those are a specific incident, right? So that kind of stuff, or doors, heavy doors that are now for whatever reason are now need to be cut some way or another, and then we don't have the means for it, that are maybe impacted by some structural type of failure on the door where we can't necessarily get rid of the whole door, or just partial, or maybe a wall where normal things cannot go through. It's the same type of breaching procedures. Nothing necessarily changes in itself, just the application, whether it be tactical or for a disaster.
So does that mean what you're saying is you already train in the ways in which you use explosive breaching, and the difference between tactical and rescue operations are not the way in which you would breach, but the situation you find yourself in?
Correct, sir. We don't necessarily change much of the actual explosive breaching itself. If it's a door in a tactical operation and it's a door in a disaster, it's still the same type of method in itself would be the explosive breaching. However, obviously we wouldn't it's the tactical element or tactical portion of it is negated, right? So obviously we're not there with rifles and that kind of stuff. It's a rescue operation.
Does any of your training include training with the fire department or medical personnel or other rescue organizations or members?
In our tactical training itself, yes, it does, sir. We call TEMs often ride with us in our vehicles, or they have an ambulance that follow us into our tactical operations itself. The fire department is readily available to kind of breach stuff as well. But in natural disasters, obviously, I think the initial portion of this was in a major natural disaster they would be tapped out, right? So there would be portions of the fire department that wouldn't be able to come to rescue certain people in certain locations, and police officers would be stuck trying to deal with it and deal with situations that the fire department generally trains on their own. We do train with paramedics themselves that ride with us and give us an ability to insert medics into the situation.
Are there, so you mentioned doors, walls. Are there any other, let's say, mediums that you would use explosive breaching on that show up in rescue operations that wouldn't show up in standard tactical operations?
Can't think. I think last time we talked about like vehicles and stuff like that. That's not something that we would use the explosive breaching for. But if we're talking about like walls, doors, ceilings, floors, depending on the type of floor, obviously, cinder block walls, kind of stuff.
This too?
But those are all also found in the
One thing that I'm wondering is, when we say natural disasters for the Bay Area, obviously a really huge earthquake is one of the scenarios that I'm thinking about. And so I'm wondering if the breaching training includes how to safely breach when you might have someone who's trapped immediately on the other side, in such a way that you don't either not just have the explosive reach the person, but also trigger structural collapse in a already unstable building. I'm also thinking about how with very major earthquakes, fire and gas leaks are a pretty big concern, and wondering about training in those situations.
Those considerations that you mentioned are the same considerations that we take into account when we are doing tactical operations. I think last time we had this meeting, we discussed about like meth labs and where maybe potential gas leaks and stuff like that, where we, in those cases, we would never use explosive breaching. And then I think we also discussed the fact that there might be potential for a victim or a suspect to be directly on the other side. And also that would be also taken into consideration. So all those are the same aspect, or the structural damage to the building itself, or maybe like if we were trying to remove a wall in a tactical operation, it would be the same considerations. If there was obviously noticeable damage or an earthquake, like you said, those type of things, we would never try to affect the breach through a wall that would be supporting anything. The reason why I use the like a large garage is because those are generally, we can cut through those and without any, they hold no structural, they support no structure. So the garage itself, right? So it's just a metal door that comes down, that is, we can breach that and make entry. Generally, that kind of stuff would take a little bit to get some type of equipment to be able to cut through that or open that. So it's just one of the options.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Other general questions or clarifying questions about the program?
So I found useful in the last presentation the context that explosive breaching is one kind of breaching. Even if the department, I mean, I guess the department also uses a key, like a battering ram, it has some authorization to do so. But also the context that this is explosive breaching is rarely used. I think the sergeant said last time that in training for 8 years, there have been no incidents, although I'm not sure whether incidents referred to problems more than actual use. So in any case, I do think that in the policy, it would be in the overview and or perhaps in the definitions to make explicit that explosive breaching is one kind of breaching, that there are other kinds of breaching, and also not just the explosive breaching, one kind of breaching, but also that explosive breachers are part of a larger unit of breachers. So however whatever that construction is, I don't want to say exactly, how it should be articulated, but to give that sense of context, I think would be helpful here.
With the highlighted portions from the group, how do we feel about these definitions?
So I support what Mr. Lindsay Poland mentioned. That's why I added the two definitions above that I left open for the department to sort of fill out the definition of a breach and the definition of the breaching unit, so that there would be space for the department to sort of define what those are. And I think the definition of a breacher here down below that you highlighted, the green one, is the place where the department states that breachers for purposes of this policy is specifically those that are trained and certified to use explosive breaching devices. And that kind of gets us to where we need to start going, because I also found very useful the thought that, explosive breaching is sort of not used very often. Certainly have it, want to use it, want to be trained on it, but it is not used very often and very much for a special or rare occurrence.
And Jesse, just for the group, another question that I know was frequently discussed. Last one was in terms of prohibition, the use of these types of tools for against persons or animals, and it now is clearly spelled out in the policy that is prohibited.
I think now is probably then a good segue to move to authorization and prohibited use. Let's talk about this section of authorized use. So I butchered it a good amount. I apologize to the department for that, but I thought it could use, I thought that maybe it might make more sense to get a sort of general statement of how or what the procedure is for a breacher to sort of create, place, and then use the device and then after to sort of give an ideal or a procedure for its use, to have the level of authorization down below, required authorization, to discuss, what level, who's the one that gives the authorization and at what point it needs that authorization. And then the justification for use down below to delineate the specific situations where it might be used. To have that section below that talks about additional requirements, because it did look like there were additional requirements for the use of explosive breaching. And then to go further down to talk about deployment considerations and to get at some of the things that the department mentioned at our last meeting on it, about sort of what sorts of scenarios or factors the department considers before they use or do not use explosive breaching. I thought because they were factors as opposed to just straight prohibition, the deployment considerations section made the most sense. And then later on we have prohibited use that talks about, well, these are just flat out the situations where they are not used, a little higher. right there in prohibited use. So maybe it's easiest to talk about prohibited use first. Thoughts on the prohibited use section?
I liked the changes that you made, and I thought they seemed to reflect all of the discussion from last time. But I'm curious what others think.
And I feel the same.
Sergeant Cardone, I know you have a little communication challenges. With regard to the policy that says that explosive breaching devices shall not be used against people or animals. Your input, sir, if you have any?
No, I think it covers everything we talked about last time. I don't think there's a foreseeable use for any of that type of usage. I know our policy previously didn't state that, but it was kind of the we know that that's not what we do. But putting it in the policy as a prohibited, I think it's good.
The department mentioned, I don't remember if it was a preference against a factor or just a straight, we don't do this, about explosive breaching for vehicles. What are your thoughts about that, sir?
Just given the dynamic of a vehicle in itself and its confined space, I don't see a potential usage of explosive breaching for a vehicle. Now, if we're talking about like a gigantic bus or something like that, we don't foresee the usage for explosive breaching for that type of thing. There's a lot of potential unknowns. So as of right now, I can definitively say that we wouldn't try to breach a vehicle for utilizing explosive breaching. I think other usage, like I think somebody mentioned earlier, that we have this, it's a tool that we can use, but there's other tools that are more viable or more useful for that type of situation.
Do you think that we could add a line that says explosive breaching devices shall not be used again on vehicles?
I don't know if it's necessary, sir. I think the knowing our, like I think above we would talk about scouting the area and talking about the situation that we're in. Explosive breaching doesn't even come up as one of those. But I think if you I think the two prohibited uses, right, the against a person or animal, I think is important to have in there. But like I said, if we have a potential mobile home, which we have a lot in the city of Oakland, and we potentially have somebody barricaded inside there with the same situation, and our only entry point would be that one door of the vehicle, I think there's potential for the use of explosive breaching in that case. Not to say that that'd be the only option, just because of in itself. So I think sometimes we may pigeonhole ourselves with certain policies, and we can never do certain things by prohibiting it. I think the ones that we have now kind of give us the against a person and against an animal, I think are extremely important. But I don't think against a car or use it on a vehicle would be something that is necessary for prohibited use.
Dana Thomason?
Yeah, I see us not using it on a vehicle, like smaller vehicles, like Cardona was saying. I think that when we start getting to large vehicles, and they are considered vehicles, where you got RVs, large RVs, or even where we've had, I would hate to take it off the plate if we had like an armored vehicle where we had a barricaded suspect and we had to use it. We've had homicides or robberies in the past with armored vehicles, and I'd like that option available to the SWAT team. Does it mean that we're going to use it? Absolutely not. It means that we'll evaluate the situation, obviously use the best tool for the job.
Mr. Lindsay Pollard?
Yeah, this is not on vehicles. It's on the, well, I think I heard the department say that you would not or would should not use it if there's someone right on the other side of the door. So in the section above that is deployment considerations, there's a thing there about the presence of young children or elderly people. And I'm wondering whether we can expand that a bit to reflect what the department has said about the presence of people. Because it's, you know, obviously not just young children or elderly people who would be harmed if someone was right on the other side of the door. This is a deployment consideration. It's not a prohibition, but it does seem to me that it would reflect practice already if we just said people.
And one of the
And-
considerations by one of our members here was that he felt that the addition of children or elderly persons prohibition actually could be detrimental to the policy based on hostage situations. But I also do agree that this isn't a prohibition, this is a deployment consideration. And I know that Sergeant Cardona in detail expressed the safety considerations prior to the deployment of a breach for any persons who may be in the immediate area, and how they would not deploy it, which is outlined in the policy.
So it sounds like rather than a straight prohibition, that we, I think, could agree on having as additional things in the deployment consideration, such as one of the things we don't have here is the presence of glass as the medium or nearby glass, persons on the that would be on the other side or near the explosive breach. We can talk about maybe a section about vehicles. Vehicles specifically and their sort of
Sorry to cut you off. Maybe consider the size of the vehicle before
Right.
one of the considerations.
yeah, the amount of glass, the amount of window, whatever it might be. I just want to factor this in. I know we've had a number of barricaded maybe not quite barricaded, but you know, situations with people inside vehicles. Something to think about and to have, not for explosive breaching, but certainly in the city of Oakland.
And if I could just say on number 5, I think the spirit of that was not that the people would pose a danger to the public, but the explosive might pose a danger to the people. So
Yeah, you are correct. That's just kind of my note.
capturing that. Yeah. Okay.
Miss 2.
For number 6, I like the direction it's headed. But as I read this, I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding what it means. Because it says an explosive breach should not be used when vehicle size and composition. And I wonder if we could give a little bit more direction for that, of what kind of vehicle size or composition might mean avoid using it.
I think that's a discussion that Sergeant Cardona and I will have to, because I mean, it's a large discussion that Sergeant Cardona, being the subject matter expert, and I would have a conversation for the next meeting about, hey, these are the vehicles we would likely avoid. And then other vehicles, of course, would be approved. Because I think, as he said it best, if you were trying to outline this extremely specifically, you could end up pigeonholing yourself. But there are absolutely certain vehicles, I'm sure, that he would recommend that we would certainly not deploy on. And we could discuss that in detail and outline that under number 6 for our next meeting.
Yeah, that sounds good. For number 5, there was another piece up above in the authorization section that I think you could update to sort of mirror that. And there's a part where it says something about danger to the team. It's under the authorization section. And if that got updated from danger to the team to danger to anyone present, then I think that would sort of balance the deployment consideration for number 5.
I'll point that out when we get up there, Lieutenant.
Thank you, sir.
Let's see. Before we move away from this page particularly, let's have a chat about that large paragraph under prohibited use. Sorry, too far, a little higher. It's the grade, no, that's good. The grayed out section that says the breaching unit shall conduct no explosive breach requiring an immediate dynamic entry by tactical personnel for any other law enforcement agency unless members of that tactical team have previously been exposed to explosive breaching. So I take this to mean that breachers from OPD will not breach for other departments' tactical team or SWAT team. Do I have that right?
If they're not trained in explosive breaching.
Right. Yes, thank you.
I think that's the little caveat. So if they are, there's obviously there's a lot of other agencies that are trained in explosive breaching, so but they may not have the equipment available to them at that time. And we also have a lot of agencies that do operations within the city of Oakland. So if the occasion never arose that we needed it for some reason, that option would only be available if their team is explosive breach trained as well.
This strikes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder under what circumstances do you like assume that might happen, and is that that feels like a conversation that might be a strange conversation to have, or in what context does that conversation happen? If you're, say, two different agencies on a situation in which dynamic breaching is required, is there a moment where you literally stop and say, hey, have you guys been properly trained for this? Because that feels it's hard to sort of imagine what that looks like, but I'm curious how that happens.
It does. So oftentimes it happens where we either assist another agency in their tactical operation, or they may assist us. A lot of times this happens when they have maybe an officer involved shooting with an outstanding suspect, because that's happened before, where we've taken over the tactical operation for them, or they come and relieve us maybe after 12 hours of being at the location. So last time I remember something like that happening was an actual potential hostage situation during the George Floyd protest. And that during that time, and we had to have the FBI SWAT team come in and relieve us so that our team can go and assist with any operations with the protest itself. And that one is specifically, the conversation came up where an explosive breach was potential usage just to make entry, because of the subject had fired at officers with I think it was a long gun, and had 2 children inside. And so an immediate entry at that point would potentially be necessary. But
So-
yes, that conversation can happen. I don't think it's too odd to have a conversation like that.
I guess maybe not odd is not the right sort of adjective. I just am curious to sort of like what the sort of order of operations is around that, and at what point does that sort of like at what point is that conversation initiated when conducting an operation with another department or another agency?
Here, I can cut in a little bit.
I think-
So, sorry, Sarge. So usually especially when the SWAT team's gonna get called out for certain situations, I think we just were talking about last week, we usually don't mix our teams. It's very rare. We will have, let's say if Sacramento wants to come in to our city, do a search warrant, and it might be multiple locations. We'll split those locations up throughout the city, but our team will be assigned to one location. Their team will be assigned to another location. We usually don't mix teams at a certain location unless it's one of those rare circumstances where everyone's called. I don't know if
Okay.
that helps clear it
It
up
does.
a little bit.
I think that the language here, especially in this first paragraph or first sentence, is like somewhat obtuse, and like I've read it 5 or 6 times since we started this conversation, and I get the intent, but I also get that, like, these things have to be sort of as transparent as possible to any reader, not just police departments, because it's unfortunately, when it comes down to it, the sort of the public and other, like, people like police commissioners need to be able to sort of digest this material and understand exactly what's being said here so that they can make effective decisions when necessary. And like I just feel like it's a little bit challenging to sort of ascertain exactly what's being said here. That's all.
So I also had to read it a few times, but I wonder if this is I think part of it is because it's a double negative. I can work on trying to clear it up a little bit for y'all. But I also wanted to see about a different point, which is there a situation where the tactical team might use another department's breachers?
Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. That's considered an ad hoc team, right? And we're
Yeah.
prohibited from doing that.
Yeah, I don't see that on one of our locations. So if we have a location assigned to us, it's usually our whole team will be going to that scene. We don't like mixing our teams because of, what we've talked about in the past about our training, our equipment, the tools that we have are not the same as another agency's tools and training and policies. So that's why we like to split it up. If there are multiple locations, we'll have our team hit one location, and then we'll have their team hit another location. And I just don't see us mixing. It just won't happen, having somebody's explosive breachings coming over to our scene to use them.
Mr. Lindsay Poland?
So I thought the question, though, was not about mixing teams, but the question I thought was, is it conceivable, might happen that another agency's breacher team come into Oakland and conduct explosive breaching?
It's possible, depending on what they're trained in, their policies. It's just like with any other equipment that they may have.
But if they're going to be working independently from you, what depends on their training and policies? Like, if you've got 2 sites and you're going to do explosive breaching with both of those sites, one of them is going to be the OPD unit, and the other you might invite an outside agency to do. The only thing would be whether their equipment is going to properly breach that particular door or whatever it is, right? Or what are the considerations?
So I'm confused. So like we wouldn't just bring him in and go, hey, we're going to do a explosive breaching on this location right away. This is something we're probably there for a long period of time after we try to call somebody out. We're using our lights, our siren, possibly using the LRAD to call people out, using the phone. This is not just we're going to set up and just hit it right off the bat. That's not going to
Okay,
happen.
but what policy would govern their use? Suppose you've had a standoff for 12 hours, whatever the situation is that you're saying might lead to that. What policy would govern that outside agency's use of breaching equipment?
So, sir, just for clarity, and again, Jeff, you've done a lot of these policies. If an independent agency comes into our city, we always try to advise them of our policy, but we can't directly prohibit them, correct?
I'm talking about mutual aid. I'm not talking about an independent agency.
Right now, it'd be in K7 in that one paragraph that hasn't been approved yet.
And if I remember this discussion, essentially, if mutual aid comes in, the incoming department can only use the militarized equipment if they themselves have a policy about the militarized equipment, meaning that the policies that they would be following would be their own department's policies.
Correct.
So if
I remember a long discussion about that one.
okay, so if that department didn't have any of these prohibitions, they would be able to, in their own policy, which they're required by state law to approve, then they could just operate with their policy after being invited in by OPD for a mutual aid deployment. Is that correct?
I think the way K7 reads, as long as they have their own policy, yes.
Okay. That seems problematic.
It is, but also that is sort of a department decision when they decide to call for mutual aid, when they decide to have the department come in to assist with mutual aid.
Well, in fact,
it's also a little difficult to have sort of the department's sort of policies imposed on that other department. The department also in mutual aid situations can put them in an auxiliary situation rather than having them to do those things.
Just to point out that AB 481 does apply to mutual aid deployments within a jurisdiction. So before a department can seek another agency's deployment of military equipment in their own jurisdiction, they have to have a policy for that. I mean, that essentially is an application within the jurisdiction, within Oakland. So it's not, in fact, Oakland can say in our city, you're not going to use this in this way. Oakland has that authority.
This too.
I think last time we met, it was a really helpful discussion to talk about what specific scenarios the department would not want to use explosives. And I'm wondering if the same thing could happen here again. One of the things that I find myself wondering listening to this discussion is, is it the intent of the department to maintain the option to ask another department, another agency to use explosives for lethal purposes? And yeah, I guess that's the big question.
Sergeant Cardona or Lieutenant Papel or Lieutenant Thompson?
I would say no. We're still abiding by, it's our K3 and our use of force. We're not going to call another agency in here to use explosives on people or animals.
Is there room to reflect that in this policy or in K7?
I think K7 is already with the council, so that'd be hard to change that now. I mean, I think we can probably add it here, saying it has to any. Yeah, I think we could take a look at that.
And Jeff, you know, being the formal mutual aid liaison for special operations section, I'm doing it now as well. In the few times that I've had to call or even recognize external agencies for mutual aid, we always send them all of our policies and restrictions. So certainly we're not going to use the exercising mutual aid to bypass our own policies and procedures.
Correct. But we can work on it this week and see if we can add a line, something that will reflect what we're saying here.
That sounds great. Thanks for doing that.
Okay. I'm just going to let this Lieutenant Febble finish typing. We'll sort of see where the department, what the department does with that at our next draft. Anything else on prohibited use? And let me just say, when I say anything else, I don't mean additions, but also means objections or to anything that's currently there or in a different sector, or at least in prohibited use. This is not the last time that we'll take a look at it. So if you do think about, anyone does think about additional sections or considerations that might be in prohibited uses, we have a discussion about it, just let us know. We can talk about it under January 2nd meeting. Shall we turn to these deployment considerations above? Just half a page above. Yep. All right. So we have two different sections here that kind of do the same work. One section talks about certain considerations that discourage the use of explosive breaching. And the other section, the 1 through 6, is an explosive breach should not be used when, which kind of is a bit stronger. I guess first I want to ask is does it make sense to keep it this way? Sergeant Cardona, Lieutenant Febble, thoughts?
I personally think it's very straightforward, easy to understand, which is critical for any policy.
I don't see any issues with it.
Could I just ask, because I don't know myself whether should discourage the use is a stronger discouragement or consideration, if you will, than should not be used when. Like, how would, in the department generally, how would you interpret those in comparison with each other? Which of those is the stronger, like, yeah, you really shouldn't do that?
I personally think, sir, that should not be used is very clear as pretty unequivocal interpretation. Just says, hey, you should not be using this outlined in the below. Listen, strongly discouraged. I mean, I think accomplishes the same goal, but it's just very straightforward diction for, I always laugh that you could get this job with the GED, and I think that very simple use of diction is best. And an explosive breach should not be used when, and the following is outlined, I think is anybody could understand reasonably, but I'm absolutely open to anybody else's opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I was not just interested in the clarity, but in the kind of level of instruction to not do, like the extent to which it's discouraged, if you will. If they're seen as pretty similar, but just maybe different ways of saying the same thing, one more clear than the other, then maybe we should include those things in that earlier paragraph in that numbered list.
I think in terms of policy, from the policies that I've read throughout my career, is that anytime you see, because everybody knows the difference between should and shall, right? But every time you see the word you should either do or not do something, especially when it comes to a use of force, that grammar becomes highly scrutinized during any type of the review process. When it says you should have done something or you shouldn't have done something under consideration, those are always kind of our immediate flags for review. When they're written, I know that as a commander, when I review uses of force, when it says, you should not, or this should be considered, that's the very first thing I'm going to when it comes to review. I want an explanation of why you decided to make that decision when the policy clearly said you should do X, Y, and Z, or you should not have done X, Y, and Z. It's going to require further significant clarification to justify the use. So the word should or should not requires justification pretty clearly.
And discouraged from doesn't require the same justification. So if somebody does an explosive breach and there's a meth lab on the other side, they're not going to get the same level of questioning.
I'm absolutely sure they are, sir. Definitely. I just think that it's just not a common diction.
So I guess I'm saying, why not include those things in that numbered list?
I suppose, we certainly could, right? It's just that this is kind of like in terms of the terminology to the department, you see frequently across our policies across the board. This is the diction that officers and everybody in the membership understands very clearly. The words should and shall are used throughout the policy, and they're not misinterpreted in any way, as opposed to somebody may interpret differently. I strongly believe X, Y, Z. That may have a different meaning to somebody else than should or shall.
Just to be like 100% sure, when someone says shall not, they know absolutely do not do this, I'll get fired over it. And when they see should not, then you'd better have a really good reason for having done that. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Be prepared to explain yourself and your decision.
Commissioner.
So that actually was my question too. But when it pertains to having the fire extinguisher available, which is a little further down, and we haven't gotten to that part yet, but it's actually right.
Same page, just the paragraph.
Yeah, just it's the below the list. Yeah. So is that not a requirement when utilizing explosive breaching, or having fire extinguishers, given the nature of the hazard that it proposed requirement?
Lieutenant, it's two pages up. Deployment considerations. Yep. The gray section right there below the list.
That big gray block?
Yeah. So should is used several times in this, but
yeah, so that's a good point. So basically this says that you should have a fire extinguisher available prior to the deployment of the device. So if for any particular reason somebody did not have one, they're probably gonna have to explain what exigency would allow their decision to deploy such a device absent that tool that is highly recommended for each one. And typically that would apply under an exigency.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you think that's a deployment consideration or additional requirement for use?
I mean, I think it certainly should. Yeah, I think it's a good under deployment considerations. It is an unfortunate fact that, you know, especially under exigencies, if we have a natural disaster and somebody uses all their fire extinguishers and we don't have one immediately available, it may be taking time to get there, but the breach needs to occur immediately. It should be a consideration like, hey, we don't have one come right now, but we do have one coming. Okay, so we could utilize this tool. As a straight prohibition, again, could really tie us up under an exigent circumstance. And I think that the commonality that we're seeing here is we've never deployed an actual breach in the field because we are so judicious in how we actually do it that it would really only be under exigency that we typically would deploy these. So these are things that happen very quickly under challenging circumstance. And so, yeah, if a fire extinguisher wasn't immediately available, we certainly would, make considerations to get one on the way. But we may not want to be prohibited just because one's not immediately available, or the one that we thought we had comes out on E. That unfortunately happens sometimes.
I'm fine. I definitely want to keep that section separate because I think that it needs to be its own consideration. And I actually think, and this could be me personally, but I think it should be either or. Like we should have one or the other on scene prior to using it, unless there's exigent circumstances. And I can work on that sentence this week, or that paragraph. And obviously, I know Sergeant Cardona already said it, that in any type of situation, especially this is going to be where the SWAT team's called out on, we're already going to have medical on scene for it, but I think it's probably down below that we have medical.
I kind of liked the direction of the deployment consideration section is not a mix of paragraphs and a numbered list, but just the numbered list. And I'm curious, Lieutenant Thomason, about why you might want to mix and match a little bit there.
Because the considerations, like you might have one or you might not have the other one. I think on having a fire extinguisher or Oakland Fire Department, that you should have them on scene, no matter what. That shouldn't, whether that is, I don't think it should be a consideration. I think you should have them. Did that clear it up?
Sergeant Cardona, do you want to weigh on this, sir?
Sir, I just want to, the only thing I would say is that it should be a consideration. And yeah, I say that only because if it's not there, are we going to stop the entire operation? And is loss of life going to happen because we don't have a fire extinguisher? So I think we are, as I think all the commanders know, we have fire extinguishers in every single police car, in the Bearcat, in the Suburban. There's multiple in our chemical agents bags. There are smaller fire extinguishers, so they're there. But what are we saying, that we have to carry it with us all the way up to the front? I think it's a consideration. I think having it on scene, I think at any point when any police car is on scene, there's going to be a fire extinguisher in there. And the other fact is that if we're doing a tactical operations, like Lieutenant Thomas says, we're going to have the medical there, and we're going to have we're going to potentially have fire already on scene for any potential explosive breach. So they will be present there. My only concern is saying the difference between a consideration and a shall would be that if a exigent circumstances appeared, would we have to stop an entire operation because we don't have one piece of equipment that may not be necessary to or vital to the actual continuance of the operation? And will loss of life occur waiting for that piece of equipment?
Lieutenant Thomason or Miss Two?
Unless you want to go.
No, go ahead.
So I don't think anything in this section has a shall. They all have shoulds and should nots. So I think the suggestion is, since these are all shoulds and should nots, why not make an ordered list so people don't have to jump between reading paragraphs and then trying to understand the ordered list. Unless I'm misunderstanding how the fire extinguisher should might be treated differently than the other shoulds.
I think everyone was responding to me earlier, suggesting this might be a trait, this might be a requirement for deployment as opposed to a consideration.
Got it. Thank you.
I hear what the department is saying. I think should is fine. I think it also makes sense to clarify who has the fire extinguisher available. Right now it says members. It could literally be any department officer who's on scene. Just something to think about. I'm not suggesting it should be one way or the other. Lieutenant Thomason.
Oh, sorry, trying to get off mute here. No, I hear what everybody's saying. I think we can work on it this week, and especially since we have a couple other additions and corrections that we have to make, we can probably make that section better.
Much appreciated for your willingness to tinker with these sections. I know it's a lot. Any other thoughts on deployment considerations? I'll add one that I see from my notes of our initial meeting on explosive breaching about no glass not being used on glass doors. And then, yeah, not being used, that would probably be under number 1 there. Or a separate section. Okay. Again, this is not the final, obviously. If other thoughts come to mind about deployment considerations, please just let us all know or have them for January 2nd. Could we move up the page? Thank you. Justification for use. Seems like a good section to talk about. Let's talk about justification for use. I added a portion about training described above just to make sure the department is covered for that. I also thought it made sense to add definitions when possible so that where they can be found for barricaded subject, hostage situations, active shooter. And also thought that exigent circumstances, the 4th bullet point, needed a little bit more clarification about exigent circumstances because it's defined in a few places for the department in different policies. And then the 5th bullet point, I was wondering about, I know department likes catch-alls to make sure that they have the ability to use things when they need to or want to. This kind of seems to be the catch-all that may swallow everything, or I know that that's not what the department intended, but I think it deserves some discussion. Any thoughts about this section?
I read the section. This is obviously one of the, very important sections of the policy. I think it's perfectly written, in my opinion.
So let me ask you then. So the fourth bullet point, which talks about exigent circumstances. Exigent circumstances is defined in another policy to involve preservation of life, but also to prevent the destruction of evidence. And I think it had one more thing that wasn't exactly preservation of life.
Yeah, that seems to comport with exactly what the law says, for exigent circumstance, and I think it's good that we are using it with the same intent across policies, so that there's no deviation from one policy to the next under what exigency is.
Okay. So does the department see a situation where they are going to use explosive breaching to prevent the destruction of evidence?
I get Chris. I'm sure you're with me on this one. That's probably not going to happen.
I agree. I don't see a situation. I mean, I don't see it.
Okay. I don't remember what the third one is, but it would seem to me that that fourth bullet point might be just talking about when you need to enter a dwelling to assist in the preservation of life. Yeah. That's the main import of that bullet point.
Correct.
So on that particular point, what are situations where you would need to assist in the preservation of life? I want to run the gamut here. So someone's got a gun and it's pointed at somebody. Is that a situation where you would need to assist in the preservation of life?
Yeah, like a hostage situation, sir. Yes.
Okay. Is that not covered by the section above?
I have to, let me pull it up.
Bullet point number 2 says barricaded subject and/or hostage situations.
Well, if we're talking about multiple, yeah, that is a situation. Active shooters is another one, and that's another one that's in there.
So I'm trying to figure out what this fourth bullet point covers that is not covered by the first 2: barricaded subject, hostage situations, or active shooters.
I mean, Cardona, would rescue be applicable to this as well? I mean, rescue, I think does apply into this one.
I think it does. I think there's also okay, like if you're asking for very specific incidents, hostage situation, active shooters are obviously the main. Absolutely need to get in there now. I don't have time to cut away something, and we need to be in there. But the barricade could be like a hospital. He's not barricaded in there, but there's a potential large area where we need to breach a door to get in there quickly. Now, can we go around and he's not barricaded? Yeah, that could be in itself. But we had to go in there to try to, or a school, right? He's not necessarily barricaded, but maybe the person's moving on his way to commit harm or potentially do harm, and all we need to do is breach a door. Like that could be potential use or preservation of life, but not necessarily fall into the aspect of, is he barricaded inside the hospital? Well, can we go around and go 5 floors to the potential location? Or if he's in like a hotel room or something like that, is it easier to breach a stairwell instead of going up the elevator, which is potentially dangerous, or vice versa, right? Going up the elevator would not gain us anything, or they became disabled, or he's holding the elevator up there. Is he barricaded? Yeah, not necessarily, because there's many entry and exit points to the location. So I think it's one of those that may not fit the shoe for some of these, but we'll potentially need it for a very.
Those kind of sound like hostage or active shooter situations, but the bullet point I'm looking at says entering a dwelling. So we're talking about entering people's residences. Maybe think about that for a sec. I think I've taken up a good amount of time. Lieutenant Thomason or Mr. Lindsay Poland?
Yeah, I got it. We'll take a look at that section this week too. Page 4.
So I wanted to say a couple things about this section. You know, in the state law, this is what is given the phrase authorized uses. I think that's really what this section is. And it might be helpful to call it that. I mean, I think it's also good to, you know, say that this is justifications for use, but the state law does require the policy to include authorized uses, and I don't see that using that phrase anywhere else. And in that respect, the scenario that you described sounds much more like a rescue scenario, which we discussed earlier tonight. And if the department wants to have this for scenarios in which there's a rescue, you have to get into a hospital, the door locked, you can't take the elevator, there's been an earthquake, whatever, you know, but that is a rescue situation. And it's not an aggression situation.
No, I think that the situation I was describing was potentially like we knew a subject was going to do harm in a location. Sorry, my mic wasn't on earlier. But where a suspect is potentially going to do harm, so we have knowledge or we have previous knowledge that the subject is en route or in the building to do harm, and we need to gain access. And that's
okay. All right, fine. Yeah.
And then the other thing was the dwelling. I gave the example of hotel, like a hotel and a hospital itself, but we could think about like large apartment complexes like the Acorn building, which has like reinforced doors themselves, and manual breaching is almost impossible on some of those doors. They're so big. Not to say that it can't be done. So if we had that opportunity, then we would potentially use it, but not to say that it can't be done. But I understand that the policy itself states dwelling.
Okay. So, you know, I think Commissioner Shea's question about, you know, what are the situations you're talking about that are not covered by the previous two situations of barricaded subject, hostage situation, or active shooter? I think that question stands. If the department does want to have the authority to use this stuff for a rescue situation, then I think it would belong here. And so thanks for entering that. The other thing I wanted to say is that the last paragraph I find super problematic because it opens the door to everything else if the incident commander thinks it's appropriate. And I just think that doesn't give you any definition. It's almost completely unlimited.
So that's a good.
So I just like, you know, it may be fine to say the incident commander has to authorize it, fine. But to say any situation where the incident commander believes that it's necessary to resolve an incident that is not even defined, right? You know, I think if you also say like, okay, and no other equipment would do a better job, that could be helpful too, you know. But the way that paragraph is constructed, it just like it almost obviates everything before it, because it's like, well, whatever the incident commander thinks is the right thing to do, and I don't think that's not helpful at all. There's no guidance there really, except whatever is in the incident commander's mind.
I think that's certainly a valid concern of yours, sir. This paragraph right here finds itself in some of our policies, such as our pursuit policies, where we may encounter particularly unique and dire circumstances. The caveat to this right here is it says the report must be submitted to the chief of police within 30 days. That basically means that when a commander is making this decision, they shall write a report that goes to the chief of police regarding its immediate use. And there's tremendous scrutiny involved in that decision. And this is kind of our, again, our most dire circumstance for the people who are engaging whatever potential significant threat at the time to make the decision to obviously remedy the situation for safety. But that absolutely shall be, extraordinarily, scrutinized by the chief of police, and it shall be done very quickly. This is kind of mirrors the chief of police, investigation within 30 days is similar to our level 1 use of force policy that has to be completed by, IED and investigations within 30 days. So there is a very serious back-end investigation that has to be presented to the chief of police if this decision is ever to be rendered by that incident commander.
Okay, so, but that's not a justification for use. That's a consequence of use. If the chief has criteria, with like the scrutiny that you're talking about, what are the criteria that are going to be applied in that scrutiny? That's what should be in the justification. The criteria are, it is the most dire situation. Well, that's hard to define, I think. Let's make that a little bit more concrete. Okay, if there is another more dire situation or a different dire situation than an active shooter, what is it? That's going to be the scrutiny, the criteria for the scrutiny, or the 30-day investigation that's going to be applied. That's what should be in the justification, because that's what has to be in the mind, not just, oh, the chief is going to be on my ass, but why am I doing this? What is the public safety consideration in policy that I have been trained in that justifies the use in this moment? That, to me, is what is a justification. The rest of it is consequences.
No, and I think that's where it says right here, it says any of these situations will require the report to describe situation to justify the use of that. Very serious.
So if I can interject, I think that trying to come up with every possible scenario is kind of a no-win situation. But I do think that I agree with John in saying that at least making it very explicit that like this has to be sort of, if it is going to sort of step outside of the standard justification for use, it must be noted as like the, under extraordinary circumstances and the only sort of like, the only option or the best possible option under those circumstances. And I also think that a thing that we've run into in the past, and a thing that we saw a lot in our conversations around the sort of going back and retroactively looking at the policies, the meeting I was unfortunately not able to attend a couple weeks ago, wherein a lot of that, the sort of justification for that was, or the explanation for things is, oh, that's covered under use of force. I think in situations like this, we should explicitly state that, it can only be, this should be under extraordinary circumstances or highly unusual circumstances, and it is the sort of unexpectedly the best possible tool to be used for that circumstance, and it still falls within the use of force policy.
Got a line going here. Lieutenant Thomason, Lieutenant Dazakiros, and then Miss 2.
Oh, I'm sorry. My hand was up on accident, probably from the last one.
EQ, you're up.
Yeah, so Jeff, you got to talk. You had your hand up, so you can't do take backs. But no, I see what John is saying. I agree with them, and then with David too, that we try not to have an end all be all list. I think we had that initially also with the drones and the robots, if I'm not mistaken. But if we're looking at the list here and we say barricaded subject, hostage situation, rescue operation, does it say rescue operation on there? I'm not sure. Oh yeah, rescue, maybe rescue operation. If we say exigency, I mean, I think we are good enough with that. I mean, I don't see any other reason unless I'm wrong. I mean, obviously we don't have an end all be all list, And we can
I
never,
agree with DQ on this one. Yeah.
and we can never assume everything, and it's so hard to do that. But specifically talking about this, I think we're good with this, right, Jeff? Just if we take out the bottom bullet point and we leave everything else, I think we're good.
Yes. I agree.
Yeah. And part of, again, I remember what it was, the third thing, but when it comes to exigent circumstances, preservation of life, okay, makes sense. Fleeing suspects, I don't really think that's the situation here, and destruction of property. So that's
Yeah,
why when I hear exigent circumstance, I feel a little different legal about what its legal meaning is, as opposed to what I think we all understand it to be, which is an emergency situation of the utmost importance. Okay. So Lieutenant Fable has, I think, thrown in the towel on that last section.
I respect the people.
I think there were definitely ways to make that section work. I had a little note about it, about sort of whether it might be a higher ranking official or needing justification or parameters, but I think with the sections we have, we do cover a lot of sections that we probably will see or may envision explosive breaching. Might need some additional details on rescue operations. I know the department will think about that. Does anybody have thoughts about that while we're here?
One thing that comes to mind is when I see rescue, I think natural disaster, but I don't think that might be the definition that the department is thinking of.
Yeah, I was gonna go with, I mean, the rescue operation can be from the natural disaster, but it can, I mean, I guess we can also say it's kind of during a hostage situation too. Sometimes you're trying to rescue the person too at the same time. I see Jennifer, you're disagreeing. But it's kind of, I don't know if we have, right? I mean, I'm not sure if I know we have rescue operations for our UAVs. We left it at that. But obviously, I think this is a little bit more, obviously breaching is a little bit more severe than just, deploying a drone. So I understand, Jesse, where you're coming from, of maybe trying to describe that a little bit more. But I like the fact of describing it hard to natural disasters, etc., because technically, if we're saying that it's someone that's barricaded and it's a hostage situation, we can leave it as is. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And then the rescue operation can be, to a natural disaster, but then there might be something that's maybe not a natural disaster that we still need to go in and try to rescue and help somebody. And I'm trying to figure out, maybe something else caused something to fall that wasn't a natural disaster. Maybe a car crashed into something and someone's stuck in there. So.
Yeah, and I agree with DQ on this, but the only thing that's coming to mind, and I'm sure we'll think of something later this week, but maybe if there's a situation where someone gets shot, the suspect's not on scene, and the person's barricaded in something where we just can't use normal tools to get in. So technically, I don't think they're barricaded. It's not barricaded hostage. It doesn't really fit the criteria there, but the person's injured and we do have to get in there. So.
All right. Thank you all for your thoughts and your willingness to work on this section here. Any other thoughts about justification for use?
I have one question about rescue operation, and I'm wondering, and this might be something for the department to think about over the next week. Is there any rescue operation that the department can think of that wouldn't be the department doing something that Oakland Fire would be doing?
Say that last part again, Jennifer. Sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
Yeah, are there any rescue operations that are different than the department doing something that Oakland Fire would be doing instead?
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, and you could probably add on DQ, but the only thing I can think of, if it's a fire situation, the fire department would go in on that. Anything with a crime or any hint of being a criminal activity, we have to clear the scene first and go in there.
I was gonna say the exact same thing. When you have any type of crime, like you said, somebody was shot, we have to be there. And then the majority of the time, we're even arriving on scene first.
I want to take a moment and ask the subject matter experts if there are any other situations that they can think of that would go into authorized uses here.
I think we covered, for the most part, a large gamut of reasons. I don't know if there's anything else specifically I can think of right now.
I want to be clear, the discussion about, or whenever I say this is not the final, of course, if you do think of something, it is your policy. So I want to get everything in there that we can to the extent that it's reasonable to delineate. Mr. Lindsay Bullen?
Yeah, just to note, I think you had put in the footnotes, the definitions. And I think it would be great. I hope the department perhaps for our next meeting can fill that in. I think that would be super useful. You know, even if it's referring to somewhere else in some other piece of policy, that would be really useful.
For barricaded subject, I think is in a confidential policy, but we've entered the direct definition into one of the other policies, I think. Okay. All right. Why don't we take a look at this initial section then? Just half a page up, if you would. Okay. Authorization for use. So this section I put here because I couldn't really figure out a good place to put it. When I was chopping this up, I think it kind of gives an overview, but also, like I said, a protocol. I'm open to ideas on this portion of it. I don't know if it's the right spot or not. It talks about the purpose, the options, and the practices that the department follows to achieve the purposes and purpose of explosive breaching.
I certainly think that bullet point number 3 really covers a lot of the conversation tonight under those considerations for each designated device. I think that's very good that we have that in here.
I recall, I think it was Sergeant Cardona or Lieutenant Febel mentioning that one of the things that the breachers strive for is to use only the minimum amount needed. Is there space for that in this policy?
There was a portion in the original policy that was in there. I don't know if that got taken out.
Tried my best to not take anything out, but just reorganize.
I think that would be minimum amount. Nominal means something else.
I think I recall I moved it into the overview section. That's fine there. That's good there too. Okay. Let's see, 7:47. Got about 12 minutes left. I wonder if anyone has thoughts on other sections of this policy since we've tackled sort of the larger sections today. Should we save that for next time?
I think we should save it for next time.
Okay.
Maybe
And
one,
Go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, maybe one thing to check in on, since the next time we meet is January 2nd, I'm wondering when the department is thinking there will be an updated draft ready for review.
Okay, good question, Ms. Two. So luckily, I should be here the rest of the year, fortunately for me. I think if this is it, I obviously want to meet and confirm with Sergeant Cardona, who's kindly enough to be joining us tonight in his vacation. But I think that we could have it by the end of next Friday. What do you think, Chris? Is that possible?
Next Friday, it'll be what, right before, I think it might be feasible, yes, sir.
Yeah, we'll certainly do the best we can to give adequate time. I know it's right before the holiday.
Wait, next Friday would be December 30th, so it would be the Friday right before the Monday that we meet.
Indeed. Let me see here. What is today here? How about Chris? Are you here Monday and Tuesday next week?
I am.
I'll do the best I can to get a draft to Chris on Monday, and then hopefully we can produce something by Wednesday.
That'd be awesome. Thanks. I know with the holidays, it's a little bit tight.
we also have the other sections of this policy. I know that we haven't talked about the storage sections, although I don't think there's much to really, I don't know if there is much to talk about, as well as I added a section about recruitment and selection. If the department wants to put that in there, don't have to, just if you want to, it's there. I saw a note about it. And we still need to talk about the impact report. So even if we don't have a draft, there's still things to talk about and to work on. Okay. Any other maybe large global thoughts on, they don't have to be large, thoughts on the sections that we talked about today? Authorization for use, prohibited use, other clarifying questions? Okay, Lieutenant Febel, could you go up a half a page? There it is. Okay. One thing I wanted to clarify, because I saw 3 different things and I wasn't quite sure. I broke this training section out into prerequisites and continuing training requirements. And I think the thing that I had the most question about were the continuing training requirements. I understood that members need to pass OPD SWAT school, be current SWAT members, tactical team, and then complete the 80-hour training. And then they still need to be chosen to be explosive breachers. I'm wondering what exactly the continuing training requirements are. Is it quarterly, semi-annual, or annual training?
So as of right now, sir, we do as a team, we train twice a month. Oftentimes we talk about breaching problems and cover the explosive breaching as a potential opportunity to make entry. On 2 times a year for the most part, if not just one, but 2 times a year, we will do an actual explosive breaching day where we actually train the 10 hours on just explosive breaching.
What is the minimum required for someone to maintain their explosive breaching status, breacher status?
I don't know if we have anything established as the minimum requirement anywhere posted or anything like that.
I'm just trying to figure, I am wondering if, because one of the things to think about is what training members must undergo in order to use this equipment. And that sounds like there are both prerequisites and ongoing training. And I don't know if you want to put in that they are going to train twice a month or something else. Right now it's in there. I saw quarterly, and then I saw the semi-annual, and then the at least once a year, on semi-annual basis training with the tactical team. Just wondering what, if any, there might be to maintain status, or if that can be there is something that can be said about that.
Okay, we'll take a look at it. I think we could probably put it down as an actual, or one of the commanders want to chime in, but I think we could put it down as an actual time frame. So in order to complete this explosive breaching, you'd have to have a minimum of 2, right? That's generally what we have, even for training. And then we'll have a supervisor conducting that training as well. We only have 5 total explosive breachers as it is. So for the most part, we can generally get everybody there for the explosive breaching days. That's not, because it's not too hard to get 5 people there. But I think we can put it down on paper to exact number of hours for training a year. I don't think that's too hard.
Yeah, I mean, whatever the benchmark is, so that there's some sense. I want to try to let people know how much training goes into this, because it sounds like a lot, and it should be. Any thoughts on this training section from anybody?
I guess it's just a reflection. It's not a request to do anything different, but I'm really impressed by the fact that this equipment, if I understand correctly, has, outside of training, has not been used at all in the last number of years. There was a consideration to use it, but it hasn't actually been used at all. And the amount of training time, officer time, policy time, community time, city council time, psychological time that is going into this particular piece of equipment that is not being used for years and years is really impressive to me. And I guess it just makes me wonder. I understand it's like, okay, you train for things that you hope will never happen. It's for an extreme situation. And so you train for them, and you train with the equipment that you would use in that extreme situation. I understand that. But it just does make me wonder about proportion, about the situations that are much more likely to come up, and what training happens for that, and what type of training, and what type of community involvement like we have right now tonight. So it's just, it's a reflection. I don't have an answer. I don't have a proposal, but it's really impressive to me that this much time of the department, as well as us, you know, as members of the community, is going into something that is on the whole basically not being used at all.
With that, I feel like I should give everyone 3 minutes back on their evening. So I think I will do that. Thank you all for your time. And we will see you all on January 2nd at 6 p.m.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone.
Thank
Be
you,
safe.
everyone.
Good night.
Thanks. Have a good
Good
night.
Good night, everyone.